Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was late in the evening when Jenna found herself in the small, dimly lit office building, her only company the hum of the fluorescent lights above. The building, an old, converted warehouse, wasn't the busiest of places, but the quiet and stillness only seemed to make the atmosphere more oppressive. As the last person to leave, Jenna was used to the silence, but tonight, something felt different, off, almost like she wasn't truly alone. She'd been working late for weeks, trying to finish a massive project before the deadline. It was her first time in the office after hours, and she'd stayed late several nights before, but tonight, there was a strange feeling creeping in. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she heard the creaking of the old building's foundation. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past midnight. The others had left hours ago, and yet the place felt occupied. Her focus kept slipping from her work to the shadows that seemed to move just outside her peripheral vision. She tried to shake off the unsettling sensation, attributing it to the fatigue of a long day, but it didn't help. The unease built with every passing second, and Jenna began to hear soft, almost imperceptible footsteps coming from the hall just beyond her office. She stiffened, her heart racing. No one else was supposed to be here. No one had been here for hours. She stood up quickly and walked to the door, opening it slightly to peer into the hallway. Empty. The hallway was eerily quiet, the dim light casting long shadows along the walls. Jenna shook her head, trying to push down the knot in her stomach. It had to be her mind playing tricks. She turned back to her desk and sat down, fingers hovering over the keyboard. But before she could resume working, a loud bang echoed from behind her. She whipped around, but no one was there. The silence was deafening now. There was no reason for anyone to be in the building. And yet, the sounds persisted, soft scraping noises, the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor just outside her door. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen, listening. Her first instinct was to grab her bag and leave, but some primal sense kept her glued to the spot. As if compelled by some unseen force, she stepped toward the door again. This time, she opened it wider. There at the far end of the hall, a figure stood, just barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, gaunt, and unmoving. Jenna couldn't make out any distinct features, but the outline of the person was unmistakable. A chill washed over her as she instinctively took a step back, but that was when she noticed something else. The figure wasn't alone. Another shadow loomed next to it, and then another. The hallway, which had once felt so empty, was suddenly filled with these towering, faceless shapes, their presence hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. Jenna's heart hammered in her chest and panic set in. She slammed the door shut and backed away, pressing herself against the desk. Her mind raced, trying to process what she was seeing, or what she thought she was seeing. She had to be hallucinating, right? Then came the sound of the office door handle rattling. Jenna's blood ran cold. Someone was trying to get in. She could hear their breath on the other side, shallow and ragged, like they were waiting for her to make a move. She glanced frantically around the room, looking for something to defend herself with, but everything seemed too far away. The rattling stopped. A cold shiver crawled down her spine as she heard a low, rasping voice coming from the other side of the door. "Let me in." It wasn't a request, it was a demand, and it sounded impossibly close, like the person was standing right outside the door. Jenna's legs were like jelly, and she sank to the floor, too terrified to make a sound. The shadows outside the door shifted again, and one of them, no, it wasn't just a shadow anymore, stepped forward, pressing its face against the small window in the door. Its eyes were dark, hollow, and unblinking. It smiled, revealing rows of teeth far too sharp to belong to a human. Jenna screamed, but no sound came out. The creature pushed against the door, the wood groaning under its weight. It didn't matter. Jenna knew, in that moment, she couldn't escape. The darkness had already enveloped her. The thing on the other side wasn't a man, wasn't anything human. And then, just as quickly as it had all started, it was over. The door stopped rattling. The shadows retreated into the dark corners of the building. Everything fell silent once more. Jenna, trembling uncontrollably, stayed frozen in place, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. She didn't leave the office until the first rays of morning light poured through the windows. When she finally made her way to the front door, she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears, deafening and frantic. The hallway was empty. The building was still. And yet, when Jenna stepped outside into the morning light, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her.
Story number 2.
It was a cold, quiet night when Aaron found himself alone in the office building, working late to meet a tight deadline. The rest of the staff had left hours ago, and the fluorescent lights above hummed softly, casting long, flickering shadows across the empty space. Aaron, accustomed to staying late in the office, always found the solitude comforting until tonight. The building was an older one, with creaky floors and a strange draft that seemed to whisper through the cracks in the walls. As Aaron worked, his mind kept drifting from his task to the odd sounds that seemed to come from all directions. Distant footsteps, the squeak of something heavy being dragged, and the occasional soft tapping against the windows. He told himself it was just the old building settling, the wind playing tricks, but the unease continued to grow in his chest. He looked up from his computer screen and checked the time, 2:14 a.m. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't before. There was a strange, heavy silence in the air, almost as if the entire building had held its breath. The usual noises had stopped. No creaks, no hums, no drafts, just silence. He tried to push the feeling down and refocused on his work, but the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Then, as he clicked through another email, he heard it. A soft scrape like fingernails running along the floor. His pulse quickened. He stood up, his eyes darting to the hallway outside his office. The building was empty, but the sound persisted, slowly growing louder, as if something or someone was approaching. Aaron hesitated. He knew he should check, but his feet were rooted to the floor. The sound stopped, replaced by a faint, almost inaudible breathing, as if someone was right behind him. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He slowly turned, half expecting to find someone standing in the doorway, but there was nothing there. His heart pounded as he took a cautious step toward the door. He couldn't just ignore it. The building wasn't the kind of place where things like this could go unnoticed. The faint sound of footsteps echoed again, closer now, as if someone was walking toward him through the dark hallway. With a deep breath, Aaron opened the door and stepped out. The hallway was empty, just like before, but the temperature had dropped. His breath came out in visible puffs, and a cold chill seemed to cling to the walls. The silence was overwhelming. He called out, his voice weak and uncertain, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. Only the eerie silence, punctuated by the faintest scraping sound, continued to hang in the air. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Aaron saw something move. A shadow, sliding across the wall like a person, but it moved without sound, without form. It was as if it were made of darkness itself, twisting and stretching, as though it were more a part of the building than anything else. He froze, the blood draining from his face. The shadow didn't stop. It kept moving, growing longer and stretching toward him. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out of there, but he couldn't move. The shadow seemed to be pulling him in, the air around him becoming colder, the pressure growing heavier. Aaron backed away slowly, trying to shake the image from his mind, but as he moved, the scraping sound grew louder again. This time, it wasn't coming from the hallway, it was coming from inside his office. He turned and sprinted back to his desk, expecting to find the source of the noise, but the office was empty. His computer screen flickered, and a new document appeared in front of him, a blank page, but at the top, written in red, were the words, "You should have left." The door slammed shut behind him with a violent crash, and Aaron spun around, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Something was wrong. The shadow he had seen was now in the room with him, a dark, inhuman shape hovering in the corner. He could feel its presence, the coldness seeping into his skin, draining the warmth from his body. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the room itself was closing in on him. With no time to think, Aaron grabbed his bag, his hands shaking uncontrollably, and rushed for the door. But before he could reach the handle, the lights flickered out, plunging him into complete darkness. He felt a cold hand brush against his arm, and a voice whispered in his ear, so close that it sent a jolt of terror through his spine. "You're not alone." Aaron slammed the door open and ran into the hall, not daring to look back. The building felt alive now. Every corner, every shadow seemed to be moving toward him, following him. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness, louder and louder, until they were drowned out by the pounding of his heart. He reached the exit, and as he shoved the door open into the night air, the freezing cold hit him like a wave. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. The next morning, Aaron returned to the office to find everything exactly as he had left it. Nothing out of place. His computer was shut off, his desk clean. But when he opened his email, there was one message in his inbox. It was from an address he didn't recognize, and it had only one line of text. "I'm still here." He never worked late in that building again.
Story number 3.
It was nearly 2 a.m. when Sarah, a junior accountant at a small firm, finally looked up from her screen. The office, tucked away in an old red brick building, was completely silent, except for the soft hum of the overhead lights. It had been a long day, and the office had emptied hours ago. She'd gotten used to working alone at night, the solitude a welcome change from the chaos of daytime office life. But tonight, something felt different. The building, with its creaking floors and low ceiling, always gave off an eerie vibe at night. The air had a distinct chill to it, and the faint smell of old wood and dust lingered in the hallways. Sarah had always told herself it was just the age of the building, but tonight she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she typed, her mind growing distracted by the strange stillness around her. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past 2 a.m., and she was almost done with the work she'd stayed late to complete. That's when she heard it, a faint sound, something like a footstep. At first, she dismissed it, attributing it to the building settling. But then she heard it again, clearer this time. She froze, her heart beating faster as she listened. Her office was at the end of a long, narrow hallway, and there was no one else in the building. She was certain of it. The last person had left hours ago. Sarah stood up from her desk and quietly moved to the door, peering into the hallway. Empty. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, but the unease remained. She turned back to her desk, trying to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting. The sound of footsteps seemed to follow her, soft, deliberate, coming from the far end of the hallway. Her pulse quickened. There was no logical explanation for it, and yet every instinct in her told her she wasn't alone. Unable to ignore the feeling anymore, she grabbed her phone and quietly stepped into the hallway, shining her flashlight down the dark corridor. The faint glow from the light barely cut through the darkness, and there was no sign of movement. The building seemed so still that it almost felt suffocating. She checked the stairwell and the restrooms, but everything was as it should be. She was about to head back to her office when the sound came again, a loud bang, like something heavy had been dropped. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no denying it now. Something was happening, something she couldn't explain. With a racing heart, she turned and hurried back to her office. The moment she closed the door behind her, everything seemed to fall silent again. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was just her imagination playing tricks. But as she sat back down at her desk, a strange chill swept over her, colder than before. Her breath misted in front of her, despite the fact that the heater had been all evening. The next sound she heard wasn't footsteps. It was the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Sarah's stomach twisted in fear. She hadn't heard anyone approach her office, and there was no reason for any door to be opening. She jumped up and hurried to the door, flinging it open, only to find the hallway still empty. No one was there. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a text from her colleague John. "Hey, just making sure you're okay. I saw your car outside. You're working really late tonight?" Sarah glanced at her phone, confused. The text was sent just moments before, but John had left hours ago, and there was no way he could have seen her car from his location. The building had no windows on that side, and she knew he was already miles away. As she turned back to the hallway, the hairs on her neck stood on end. Something was wrong. She backed into her office, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. That's when she saw it. Out of the corner of her eye, a shadow moved in the darkness of the hallway, long and distorted, like it wasn't bound by the laws of reality. Before she could scream, the office lights flickered and went out completely. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she reached for her phone to use its flashlight. When the light came back on, she could see something in the reflection of her desk, a dark figure standing behind her in the corner of the room. The figure was tall, unnaturally thin, with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to pierce into her very soul. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The office was empty. No shadow, no figure. In a panic, she grabbed her bag and rushed for the door. As her hand reached for the handle, the door slammed shut on its own with a loud crash, throwing her back into the room. She screamed, trying to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Through the thin crack in the door, she could see the hallway once again. The shadow that had been in the corner was now standing just outside, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The air around her grew thick and suffocating, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. The shadow moved toward her. Her heart pounded as she backed into the corner, unable to look away. The sound of scraping metal filled the air, growing louder as the figure neared. It didn't make a sound as it moved, but Sarah could feel its presence, cold, dark, malevolent. The last thing she remembered before everything went black was a whisper in her ear, so cold it felt like ice. "You should have left earlier." Sarah was found in the office the next morning, pale and unresponsive. Her phone was still in her hand, but there was no trace of what had happened. The door was wide open, but there was no sign of any intruder. After that night, Sarah never returned to the office. No one ever figured out what happened to her. The building, once full of employees and life, was abandoned shortly after. Some say it was cursed. Others claim it's haunted. But the few who worked there late at night afterward always reported strange noises, flickering lights, and the sense that something or someone was watching them.
Story number 4.
It was well past midnight when Lisa, a junior graphic designer at a small marketing agency, found herself alone in the office, working on a tight deadline. The building was eerily quiet, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. She had always preferred working late when the office was empty, the solitude allowing her to focus without the distractions of daytime chatter. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thicker, heavier, as if something was pressing in on her from all sides. Lisa tried to push the feeling away, telling herself it was just the exhaustion from hours of staring at a screen. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the sensation that she was being watched. Every time she glanced up from her computer, the room felt too still, too silent. She could hear the faintest creaks and groans of the building as if it were shifting and settling around her. The hum of the lights, which had always been a comfort, now felt unnervingly loud. And then there was the sound, a faint rustling coming from the hallway, like the shuffle of footsteps. Lisa froze. Her heart rate picked up, but she told herself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. She stood up, walked over to the door, and peered out into the empty hallway. Nothing. Just the faint glow of the emergency exit sign at the end of the corridor. It was late, and everyone had long since gone home. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. It was just her imagination running wild. But then the sound came again. This time, it was closer. Lisa's skin prickled as she turned back toward her desk. The office was still empty, but the air felt charged, as if someone was just behind her, watching. The temperature seemed to drop, and her breath came out in visible puffs. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to leave, to get out of the building. But as she grabbed her things and moved toward the door, the lights flickered. And then they went out completely. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Lisa's pulse thundered in her ears as she fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to guide her. The beam of light cut through the blackness, revealing nothing but the familiar office layout. She cursed under her breath, frustrated with her racing thoughts, and reached for the door handle. But before she could even touch it, she heard something. A whisper, soft and unintelligible, coming from somewhere in the dark. Lisa froze. The whispering grew louder, though still indistinct, as if multiple voices were murmuring just beyond her reach. Her body tensed, fear creeping up her spine. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize it, But the rational explanations weren't coming. Every instinct screamed at her to run. The whispers grew clearer, now saying her name, as though the voices were calling her, beckoning her towards something. She didn't move. She couldn't. The door handle jiggled as if someone were trying to open it from the other side. Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from the door. She looked around, desperate for any sign of movement. The office was still empty. The whispers, however, were growing louder, angrier, as if the very building itself was alive and angry. Lisa's breath hitched as she heard something scrape across the floor behind her. She spun around, and for a split second, she thought she saw a figure, tall, shadowy, and impossibly thin, standing by the window. She blinked, and it was gone. Her phone buzzed in her hand, breaking the tension. It was a text from her colleague, Jane. "Hey, just checking in. You still there? Saw your car outside, but I didn't hear you leave. Everything okay?" Lisa's blood ran cold. Jane had left hours ago. There was no way she could have seen her car. Lisa didn't reply. Instead, she opened the door, cautiously stepping into the hallway. The temperature had dropped even further, and now the air was thick with a heavy, oppressive silence. The walls seemed to close in on her as she moved down the hall, shining her phone's flashlight in every direction. No one was there. She glanced toward the stairwell, then the bathrooms. The building was empty, just as it should be. But then, just as she was about to head back to her office, she heard it again. The unmistakable sound of dragging. Something was being dragged along the floor just behind her. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she spun around, her heart pounding, expecting to see a person, something, anything. But the hallway was empty. She stood there, trembling, trying to control her breathing. The dragging noise stopped, but now there was another sound, a faint scraping like nails on the walls, and the unmistakable scent of something decaying. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as the whispering started again, only this time it was clearer, more deliberate. "Come closer." Lisa's legs were shaking, but she couldn't seem to move. She was rooted to the spot, every fiber of her being screaming at her to run. But before she could turn around and escape, she felt a cold hand, icy cold, brush against her arm. She spun around, but there was no one there. The hand felt too real, too solid. The air grew colder still, as if the temperature had dropped to freezing. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jane, "Leave, now." The message was short, but Lisa could feel the urgency in it, and the cold dread that had settled in her stomach twisted even tighter. She bolted back to her office, slammed the door behind her, and locked it. The building was silent again. The whispering had stopped, but the heavy, suffocating feeling remained. Lisa didn't dare leave. She sat in the corner of her office, clutching her phone, waiting for something, anything to happen. She didn't know how long she sat there, paralyzed by fear, but eventually, the first light of dawn broke through the windows. As the sun crept into the room, she stood up, trembling, and slowly opened the office door. The hallway was empty. There were no signs of what had just happened, no dragging marks, no strange figure. Lisa never returned to the office after that night. When her colleagues came in the next day, they found her desk untouched, her computer still on, but no sign of her. The only thing that remained was the eerie feeling of being watched. The company moved to a new location not long after, but those who worked late in that building, even after Lisa was gone, reported hearing whispers in the dead of night, cold spots, and the sensation that something or someone was always watching from the dark.
Story number 5.
It was well past midnight when Jared found himself alone in the office, working to finish a project for a tight deadline. The building was a relic from a bygone era, an old, towering structure with creaky floors and flickering lights. Most of his coworkers had already gone home, leaving the space eerily quiet. He was used to staying late, his focus uninterrupted by the noise and distractions of the day. But tonight, there was something off about the atmosphere. The air felt heavy, as if the building was pressing down on him. The usual hum of the fluorescent lights felt louder, more invasive, like they were trying to drown out the silence. Jared dismissed it as exhaustion and returned to his work. But the quiet wasn't normal. It wasn't just the stillness of a late hour. It felt like something else was present in the space with him. Every now and then, Jared would hear a faint sound, the the soft scuffle of footsteps coming from somewhere down the hall. He'd pause, thinking it was just the building settling, or maybe someone still working late in another corner of the building. But when he checked, the hall was empty. Nothing but shadows stretched across the walls, the flickering lights casting an unsettling glow. As the hours passed, the feeling of being watched intensified. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he couldn't shake the cold shiver that ran through his body. He stood and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. The street below was empty, and the city lights shimmered in the distance, but the feeling of unease refused to leave him. He turned back toward his desk and froze. The soft tap of footsteps was louder now, closer. His heart rate quickened, and he looked toward the hallway again. There was no one there. Jared's eyes darted to the door of the office. The hallway outside was as dark as ever, the low hum of the air conditioning now the only sound. He took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway, flashlight in hand, though he couldn't explain why he felt so nervous. He checked the stairwell, the restrooms, the storage closets. No one. The building was empty, just as it should be. Yet, the unsettling feeling didn't ease. As he was about to turn back to his office, he heard it, a loud, scraping noise, like furniture being dragged across the floor. His heart raced, and he rushed back to his office, a sense of urgency clawing at him. He slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the silence. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging him into darkness. Panic gripped him as he pulled out his phone, the small flashlight barely cutting through the blackness. His breath quickened as he felt the oppressive weight of the silence press down on him. The flashlight illuminated the office, but nothing was out of place. Then he heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. Jared froze, his mind racing, trying to find an explanation, anything that would make sense of what was happening. But nothing made sense. His pulse thudded in his ears as the sound grew louder, closer, and nothing. Complete silence. His phone buzzed in his hand, jolting him from his thoughts. A message from his colleague, Mia. "Are you still there? I saw your car outside, but it's past midnight. Everything okay?" Jared's stomach churned. Mia had left hours ago, and there was no way she could have seen his car. He stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to calm himself. He couldn't stay here any longer. He grabbed his bag and moved toward the door, but before he could open it, the lights flickered again, and he heard it. A soft, raspy breath, like someone standing too close behind him. He whipped around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, the only movement the shadows stretching across the walls. He opened the door slowly, stepping into the hallway. The temperature had dropped significantly, and he could see his breath in the cold air. The hallway stretched out in front of him, the faint hum of the lights casting long shadows. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" His voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the darkness. No response. The building felt like a tomb, and he felt as though he were trapped inside, unable to escape the heavy air. As he moved down the hallway, the sound came again. This time it was unmistakable, something heavy dragging across the floor just behind him. Jared spun around, his heart racing, expecting to see someone or something. But the hallway was empty. His mind was screaming at him to run, to get out of the building, but his legs felt frozen, unwilling to move. The dragging sound stopped and the whispering began. Faint, unintelligible words whispered in his ear, the sound coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, dark, malicious. The whispers grew louder, and he heard his name being called in a voice that didn't sound human. His phone buzzed again, and he looked down at the screen. Another message from Mia. "Leave the building. Now." The urgency in the message made his blood run cold. He tried to reply, but his fingers shook too badly to type. The air around him was thick, suffocating, and the whispers became louder, as if something was moving closer. The temperature dropped even further. It felt like the entire building was alive, watching him. Panicking, Jared turned to run back to his office, but before he could reach the door, he felt something cold and clammy brush against his arm. He froze, his heart leaping into his throat, but when he turned around, there was nothing there. The building felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing tighter and tighter. He reached for the door, and before he could open it, he heard one last whisper. So close it felt like it was inside his head. "You shouldn't have stayed." The next morning, Jared was found sitting at his desk, pale and unresponsive. His phone was still in his hand, and his computer was on, but there was no sign of what had happened. The office was locked, and the hallway was empty. The company never fully understood what happened to Jared, but rumors about the building circulated for years. Employees who worked late reported hearing strange noises, feeling cold spots, and the sensation of being watched, even long after Jared had disappeared. No one stayed after dark in that building for long.